In 2024, I only read 31 books this year. So for me, that is less than normal. But when I was looking at it, I realized I genuinely enjoyed most of the books that I read this year. So I'm going to take that as a win. So today I wanted to go over some of my favorites and some of my least favorites that I read in 2024. Hi, my name is Nicole, and I sometimes remember to make videos about the books I read. In 2025, I'm hoping to be a lot more consistent, but in order to do that, I wanted to close out 2024 and go over kind of a wrap-up of my favorites and my least favorite books. So I think I'm actually going to be positive for once and start with my favorite books, and then we will work my way back to the least favorites that I read this year. And I only have 3 that made this category, which honestly is pretty much a win for me. I think I really enjoyed the majority of everything that I read, but it was pretty easy to narrow down like my top 5. So let's get into my top 5. So my favorite book of 2024 is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I was not expecting to enjoy this book so much. I have kind of followed a little bit of reading up on the cozy fantasy trend, but I haven't really dipped my toes into it until I read this book. It did always sound like a subgenre of fantasy that I would enjoy, but I never really tested it out yet. I wasn't too sure how I would feel about it, but this book really solidified that if other cozy fantasy books are like this, I will enjoy all of them. So this book follows Emily Wilde, and she is a scholar who researches all things to do with fairies. In this world, fairies are very much real. There is a whole academic area that people spend their entire lives researching them, and it is Emily's kind of mission in life. Since she was a young girl, she wants to compile an encyclopedia that has never been done before of all the different types of fae. And this ends up taking her to a very secluded small town out in the mountains to do her final research paper that she wants to add to this encyclopedia. It really kind of, her encyclopedia hinges on the success of this mission that she goes on. And she ends up going by herself. She's a little bit weird and eccentric, and I feel like she doesn't do very well with other people. So she doesn't have any like interns to come along with her on the trip, which proves to be very difficult as she's going alone. She's not great with people. She's kind of having troubles interacting with the townsfolk. They don't really trust her. And then as everything seems to be going wrong, eventually her kind of rival, who he sees himself as her friend, but she kind of sees him as a rival academically, he comes and ends up saying, well, I'll help you with your research. And she kind of gets offended by this, and it's really great with their banter. I really enjoyed this book. It was very whimsical, and it was also very cozy and very slow paced. I will say, I have heard a lot of people say they find this book to be boring, people who didn't enjoy it. I didn't think it was boring at all. I loved reading every single day, as it really does follow Emily each day in this town and her different little discoveries as she continues on her mission. And I really liked that pacing. I thought it was done so well. It felt so real. It felt like I really was on this journey with Emily, and I really liked the different fairies as well in this story. I think I specifically liked it because they're kind of more of the wicked fairies, will make bargains with you, kind of don't like humans, and then there's kind of like the lower fairies who are kind of like more shy, and she kind of has to coax out, and those are really interesting, like different creatures as well. Overall, I really enjoyed this one, and I personally connected with Emily a lot as a main character, probably more than any other main character I've ever connected to. I think this one, that is probably why it was my favorite, just because I really saw myself in Emily, how she kind of devoted her whole life to this one obsession that she has, and she isn't really good at talking to people. She's not good at anything else, but she's really good at this one thing because it is her entire life. And I really personally related to that, and I just loved the romance as well. It was definitely more of a subplot, but it was very cute. Kind of seeing those interactions where she really does not like him, but he was really different, I would have to say. Her love interest as well, he was very whimsical and kind of more he wasn't your typical like tall, dark, and mysterious. He was mysterious, I have to say, but he wasn't that typical broody love interest that I feel like we get so often in fantasy, so I really enjoyed that as well. Overall, I definitely highly recommend picking this one up. Then for number 2, I have The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein by Kiersten White. I wasn't expecting to love this one as much as I did. I do really love Kiersten White's other series about Vlad the Impaler. I love that series. It's so good. It's on my favorite shelf. But I didn't know how I would feel about this one. I read this in the fall months because I was looking for something moody and atmospheric for fall, and this hit just perfectly. So this is a Frankenstein retelling from the perspective of Elizabeth Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein's fiance. I really liked this, and the direction it went in, though, it was a lot different than I expected, but in the best way possible. Elizabeth is probably one of my favorite female main characters I've ever read, because she is not like a good person on her high horse. She does whatever she needs to do to survive, and I really respected her. I loved being in her head, and all of her different interactions with people were very calculated. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's get into the plot as well. So this book follows Elizabeth, who as a very young girl, she was an orphan, and she was taken to be Victor Frankenstein's friend by Victor's mother. They don't really go into, you kind of find out as the story goes on, but he's been really struggling at home. He hasn't been able to keep any of his playmates because he is just very weird and kind of suffers from anger issues and just very different from the other children. However, Elizabeth right away is able to kind of read him and befriend him, and she knows that her life depends on this. So she ends up befriending him. It goes well, so the family takes her in, and she kind of spends her whole life leading up until the start of the book being Victor's friend, and she knows that she needs to be this person to for her survival and to stay with the family so she is not cast out again. However, at the start of the book, Victor has been gone for a few months. He has been away at college, and he has not come back, and he hasn't written, and Elizabeth is starting to get worried about her place in the household without him. So she and her maid friend go and look for Victor in the town where he is studying at university. And then this really does just follow the story of Frankenstein pretty well. It continues on with everything that happens in that book. So I really enjoyed this one. I liked the dynamic between Elizabeth and Victor. It very much is not a romance. It is very much a story of a girl breaking free of her captor in a way, and kind of finding her freedom and just fighting for herself. I really enjoyed that, and I liked the just toxicity of their dynamic. It was really interesting, and unlike anything I've ever read before, it was very powerful, and I definitely recommend picking this one up. It's also very short, so I definitely think you should give it a shot in the fall. It is very atmospheric, creepy, a little gory at times. It is Frankenstein after all. But I just loved Elizabeth. She was so calculating. She knew exactly what she needed to do to survive and wasn't afraid to step on people's toes to do that. Is that a Wesley? Hi. Hi, Wesley. Oh, we have a visitor. Oh, this is Wesley. You want to say hi? Hi, Wesley. Hi. Okay. So next up we have Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reid. So this was the first year I've ever read anything by Ava Reid. She's definitely been on my radar, I feel like, for a few years, but I finally picked up 2 of her books, and spoiler alert, this book and the next one is going to be an Ava Reid book. Sorry, my cat has the zoomies right now. But this one is, I would say it's more of a gothic fantasy, and it takes place in this town that is on the verge of industrialization. However, our main character, she is a young woman with 2 sisters and her father, who is a wizard. And they're really the only people that kind of follow the old magic and the old ways in this town that is kind of trying to move on to prosperity, and her father very much wants to keep him and his daughters stuck in the old world. At the start of this book, our main character, Merlin Chen, she ends up escaping for a night, and she goes to a ballet with her 2 sisters, and she ends up meeting one of the I don't know what the word for a male ballerina is, but one of the dancers there, he's the star of the show, and they end up striking up a romantic relationship. However, they come from two very different worlds. And Marlon Chan, her father, very much does not want them to ever leave the house, and she lives in this very dark, decrepit place. There's also these murders taking place throughout the town where someone is being eaten. There's random men that are found dead that they're trying to kind of uncover as well, but it's very much in the backdrop of the story. This one also, I would say, has a little bit of a slower pace, but I really enjoyed it. It was so atmospheric as we just kind of follow Marlon Chan through this time of her life where change is inevitable. She and her three sisters are also witches, and they have different abilities, although a bit minor compared to her father's magic. This is also a very powerful book of Marlon Chan kind of escaping the chains of her father and of society and kind of looking for what she wants in her life and becoming that person. Up until this point, she is very much the quiet sister. She doesn't get in trouble. I believe she's the youngest, and I really liked watching her come into her own throughout this book. I liked that at the beginning she really did let everyone walk all over her, and I think it made for a better transformation throughout the story as she kind of grew into her own self as a young woman. If you enjoyed We Have Always Lived in the Castle, I believe Ava Reid has said this book is very much inspired by that. I know she has said that she likes that book a lot by Shirley Jackson, and this very much has a very similar vibe with our main character. She's a little bit weird, a little bit dark, inside, and the storyline as well as the manner very much reminds me of that a little bit. So it has those same vibes, so if you liked that book, I definitely recommend picking this one up. The next up, we also have A Study in Drowning as well by Ava Reid. I really like this one. This is a YA dark academia book, but I think the reason that this really stood out to me so much is it's so much more than a dark academia book. This setting I feel like is a little bit more unique. It's not just taking place at a university, although we do start there. So this book follows our two main characters, Effie and Preston. Effie is in the architecture setting, and then Preston, he goes for literature, I believe, at the university. However, recently Effie's favorite author has passed away, and she enters into a contest to redo and kind of revamp the family manor of this deceased author, because his son and his wife are still living in this manor. So she ends up winning the contest. She goes off to the manor, and it is very much decrepit. It is falling into the sea. So I really loved this like seaside setting. It was very dark, very mossy. There was a lot of decay. I loved the atmosphere of this book. It was 10 out of 10. I think that's really what made the book for me. I did also love these characters and the world. It was a very rich fantasy world that we are in. It was very much rooted in superstition in this old part of the country. And then our other main character is Preston, and he's a literature student who is looking to, he's kind of going through all of the different papers and diaries that this late author had, because he is determined to prove that this author was not really the author of this famous work of literature that he is known for. He believes someone else was actually the author. So he and Effie kind of work together begrudgingly to figure that out if he really was the author, while she works on her architecture project, and there's just a lot of good chemistry between them as well. Yeah, definitely pick this one up if you're looking for something that has a great atmosphere that is dark academia or has like a literature backdrop as well. And then my final favorite book of the year is The Prisoner's Throne by Holly Black. This is the sequel to The Stolen Heir, a duology. It is kind of a spin-off series from the Cruel Prince series. So I can't really get too much into what this one is about just because spoilers. But yeah, this was such a stunning sequel. My only complaint was it was from the perspective of Oak, and it didn't have Ren at all as her perspective. The first one was just from Ren. I wish it would have been dual POV. That was literally my only complaint, but otherwise this was such a great sequel. This really is like the true enemies to lovers. If you want to read enemies to lovers, read something by Holly Black, because I feel like she does it the best. So many authors, they kind of dislike each other, or they're enemies for a silly reason, or they're enemies but then they immediately like get together and it's not like a big thing, so it doesn't really matter that they were enemies. Like, they were so worried about being together because they're from different sides, but then it doesn't matter. That is not this case at all. In the start of this one, she actually imprisons him. He's in this horrible prison for a while. It's really good though. Holly Black does enemies to lovers right. They are truly enemies up until like very far in the story. There's a real good reason why they cannot be together, and they have to overcome those obstacles first before they're able to be together. She just knows how to write enemies to lovers. And also, I just love this Fairy Loot edition. It is so pretty. I think it has art on the inside, and then it has a little letter as well. Love this edition. So worth it. Okay, and now I'm just going to briefly get into my least favorites. I'm not going to talk too in depth about them because I feel like I've already yapped a lot about my favorites. But first we have the Society for Soulless Girls. I ended up being really disappointed with this. I feel like the concept was great, but the execution and the writing style was not. We are following two girls who go to this university, and in the past there were 4 people that were murdered at this university, so they closed down, and now they are reopening. So that is why our main character, one of them, wanted to go to this place, because she had known, I guess, the person, one of them that was murdered. She was a bit older than her, but she kind of knew who she was. She grew up in the same town. So she's always been obsessed with solving the mystery of those murders. So that's why she enrolls here. And then we have another student who, I believe she's more of like the dark academia student. She's very much prestigious and she kind of thinks she's better than everyone, so she doesn't really like our other character because she's more of like a jock and an athlete. So right away they're roommates, but they kind of butt heads. They don't necessarily like each other, but it was just for really superficial reasons. And again, it wasn't good enemies to lovers like I was just talking about before. It was kind of a stupid reason that they didn't like each other, so I wasn't really convinced. And I really didn't care for the romance. I didn't really like either of the main characters. And then I also felt like the writing style was very juvenile. The bad guy was very over the top. I immediately was able to spot him. And we were very much told a lot of things without being shown. Like we were told they didn't like each other. I didn't really feel like why they didn't like each other, the two main characters, right away. And it wasn't very atmospheric. Again, this is supposed to be a dark academia book, so it should have that academic kind of... It had the setting, but it didn't have the atmosphere. Not a lot of descriptions or anything that really painted the picture for me. So that really docked at points as well. And then also, this didn't have any trigger warnings, but there was like a murder of a pet in this book. And I didn't like that. And then they didn't really address it either. They were just like, oh, haha, she has anger issues about the person that murdered the cat. And then I feel like they didn't really talk about it again, and it really upset me that there was no trigger warning, so I don't know, didn't like it. The next up we have The Girl from Shadow Springs. This book really had everything going for it with the unique plot that I was reading about. This takes place in it's kind of like a Western, but in a very snowy, forbidden land as well, and it is a fantasy as well. So right away from the get-go, I was a little taken aback because of the writing style. Our main character kind of has like a southern accent, dialect, and it was honestly really hard to read because it was throughout the whole book, but then once in a while like the author would forget about it and then it would also come back. But even like when she's thinking in her head and the way the sentences were written, it wasn't just how she would speak for the dialogue, it was also written with that like accent dialect when you were reading it, and I really didn't enjoy it. I didn't think it was done well. Out of nowhere, also there's a fantasy element with magic that's never really explained very well, but also there just is magic in this world and we just have to accept it, but we're not really going to explain it, and then it's there throughout the rest of the book. So I didn't really like that turn as well. I think this could have been really interesting because we follow a main character. She ends up working with this guy and they kind of have to travel through the unforbidden wasteland of the snowy land to go and save her sister. But there never really felt like there was that much sense of an urgency to save the sister. And overall, it just really fell flat for me. And then the final book is the only one I don't own a physical copy of, and that is Thrum. So Thrum is actually a short story, and it is a sci-fi horror that I really enjoyed while I was reading it, but then when I finished it, the more I thought about it, the more upset I became, just because I felt like it could have been so much more and it didn't really live up to the hype that I was anticipating. So we follow our main character, a young woman who wakes up on her spaceship and everyone in her crew is dead and her ship has been sabotaged. And then all of a sudden she is hailed by this other ship and they say, hey, come to our ship, we can like help you patch up and everything so you can be on your way. So she goes onto the ship and she starts to discover not everything is as it seems on the ship. Something is terribly wrong. And there's like only one crew member that she speaks to. As far as she can tell, there's no other crew members on the ship. That's really, I feel like, all you should know going in. I really did enjoy it, but I think because the plot just turned out to be exactly what I thought it would be, I was able to guess exactly like what the big bad was, kind of what the plot twist around the ship that she got onto with the alien species, what that would be. I was able to kind of guess it plot point for plot point, and I feel like that when I thought about it afterwards, I was kind of let down. I think that if this book had been like a full-length novel, I might have enjoyed it more because we would have had more time to have that creepy atmosphere. It definitely was there. The ship was definitely creepy for parts, but because it was so short, I feel like we didn't see it as much as I would have liked to have seen. But if we would have really built that atmosphere for longer, I would have felt like there would be more suspense and just more dread that I would have been feeling as the story progressed to the final plot points. And I feel like then I wouldn't have been as disappointed with guessing the majority of the plot had I just felt this dread the whole time throughout the story and then it led up to that. I think it would have had a better payoff. But since it was a little bit too short for that, I feel like I wasn't as like, oh wow, that was amazing after I finished it. I will say I did really, when I first finished it, I was like, okay, that was pretty good. Because like the last few pages, I did like how that ending happened. But like the overall plot reveal, I feel like was a little bit of a letdown just because it was what I already guessed. And it could have been even darker. And I feel like it wasn't quite as dark as I was hoping for. But again, that can be obviously on the person, on the reader, for having their own expectations and then versus what it was. Overall though, I think this could have been done a little bit better if it was like a full length, the author had more time to flesh it out, but I understand she did purposely. She wanted it to be a short story, so I'm not going to harp on her for that. But for me personally, I was a little bit let down with the execution of such an interesting plot. Yeah, those were my favorites and least favorites of 2025. Thank you so much if you made it this far, and comment down below what your favorite or least favorite book of 2024 was. Maybe I'll pick up your favorite in the new year. Hope you have a good day or night wherever you are. Bye!